So I was listening to a lady give a talk on narcissism, and once again, I was amazed at how not only is what is being described similar to what goes on in politics, but really it's the exact same thing. There's no difference at all when narcissistic behavior is being discussed in the context of like personal relationships or the workplace. It's the same thing with politics. It's just in that political context. It's just the narcissist has a position of political power. So, a couple things I'll start with that definitely apply to the political world is that they their main concern, or like what they never want to happen, is to be exposed for their true nature. So in the case of the narcissist or the toxic personality, it's exposing like this basically she said evil, and I think that's appropriate. I don't think we need to water things down when that's part of what proper exposure is not watering it down, just saying saying it is, calling it for what it is, right? So think about that in the political context, like not wanting to be exposed. And you come across all kinds of stories and news, you know, news stories and historical documentation about, cover-ups of various sorts. And when someone tries to expose someone with political power, right, oftentimes bad things happen to them, right? There's just a lot of secrecy and a lot of like trying to cover up their misdeeds, and there's all of these scandals and so on. Like that's just very, very common in politics, and it fits exactly with what they call like the narcissistic personalities, that they're very much wary of being found out, kind of thing. Um, and it's a double standard, right? Because they want to be all up in your business, but they don't want you uncovering their own, kind of thing, right? So, in the political context, obviously, like the whole issue of privacy, right? Government has all these levels of top secret and whatnot, right? All this classified information. But as far as like the general population, the way they see it is like there's nothing top secret, right? Like they just think that they can invade people's privacy 24/7, and it's in the name of security, and so it's all good. So it's a complete double standard, right? Like they want all the privacy for themselves, but none for you, which is abusive. Another interesting parallel in descriptions of narcissists. Oftentimes you'll hear discussion of like narcissistic supply, like they need a supply, meaning like they need people to feed off of. Well, like I said in part one, the description of like something like a parasitic relationship that you're entangled with, is how a relationship with a narcissist is described. Well, that's exactly what, like I said, is the case with, being entangled in a parasitic so-called social contract that you never actually, agreed to voluntarily. It was more pushed on you. You were more intimidated into going along with it. So the supply for a narcissist in a position of power is like the whole tax base, basically. Like that's their, obviously, the supply of the tax dollars, but not just that. It gives them a population to control abusively, which is apparently how they get their kicks. But of course, they call that abuse protection, right? So authoritarianism is actually caretaking. Censorship, again, they're protecting you. Pushing drugs and medical devices on you, again, they're protecting you. Disarming nonviolent people, oh, that's protection, right? So it's all deceptive, manipulative abuse, in the name of keeping you safe, right? That's their go-to justification for their abuse, right? And those that go along with that are basically suffering from what's called Stockholm syndrome, wherein the person being abused, terrorized, actually takes the side of their abuser and thinks, their abuser is actually doing them well, taking care of them, etc. Okay, a few more notes I had taken while listening and reading up on what people have identified as common narcissistic tendencies. So one is that they have an excessive sense of entitlement, namely an entitlement to be abusive. Well, that again is exactly what government is, right? They think they're entitled to have the right to abuse, right? You don't have the right to disarm nonviolent people or push drugs on people or commit extortion against people, but they do, right? They're entitled to that abusive act, right? They see themselves as entitled to their abuse. So a description of narcissists that is exactly the same. It's an exact description of politicians, status, the whole system. It's the same thing. It's the same kind of person. So again, this was a description of a narcissist in a personal relationship, and they said their main motivation is domination through grooming you and putting you in a trance. Well, again, that's just exactly what governments do, right? They want to dominate and they groom you, or in other words, indoctrinate you and put you in a trance. Well, mass media is all about that. It's just a perfect description of the system. And yet the person who was giving this descriptor was not talking about politics at all. They were just talking about narcissists, like they had nothing to do with politics. Okay, the next thing that was listed as, a common narcissistic tendency is that they have boundaries for themselves, but think you should have none. Okay, so that's just like I said before, they have extreme privacy boundaries on themselves, right? Like if you try and unearth some classified information, right, they're gonna call you a criminal and put you in jail, right? But they think they can just invade your privacy all day and night, and it's totally fine. So boundaries for themselves, but none for you. And this again was not talking about politicians or government, but it was just talking about narcissists in the personal life sphere. But it's again a perfect description of the state. Okay, another one here is they want to be able to violate the healthy boundaries of others and then slander anyone who doesn't accept their abuse, calling you selfish. So again, it just goes with the last point. They're talking about in personal relationships that they want to violate your boundary, and then, they'll yell at you for being selfish if you don't go along with their abuse. And that's exactly what governments do too. They call people dangerous and extremist. And I've mentioned this before, but just to remind folks, the term extremist is just really stupid. Like if you actually think that being called an extremist in this world is a bad thing, if you think it has a negative connotation, that just goes to show your ignorance of the world we live in, which is extremely evil. So if you're living in an extremely evil world and you're a good person, then that would mean that you're on the extreme other end, right? Imagine a spectrum of good and evil, good on one side, the far one side of the, I don't want to say left or right because they're going to think of politics left and right. Just one end of the spectrum is good and one end of the spectrum is evil, right? If the society is all the way on the evil side to the extreme, 100% evil, then if you're very good, you're going to be an extremist to that end, right? It's just you have two extreme ends to a spectrum, right? So if you think being a so-called extremist in an extremely bad society is a bad thing, it just shows your moral bankruptcy, I guess, to use an extreme term. No pun intended. So yeah, but they'll slander you, is what I was getting at, is that they'll just make you out to be a bad person, a crazy person, right? If you don't go along with their abuse, right? You're selfish, so on and so forth. So let's see, last one here. This was the description again of narcissists in like a personal relationship context. They said, narcissists will try to throw you off balance and then tell you exactly what you want to hear. Well, this is the whole Hegelian dialectic, right? It's the whole like problem, reaction, solution game that they play over and over, right? They throw some crisis at you, but then tell you what you want to hear, like, oh, here's the solution. Or, a politician during a campaign will tell you what you want to hear when you're thrown off balance by some opposition to freedom, for example, like increasing communism, and then you have a candidate come that seems like, oh, they're really anti-communist, that's great, telling you the sweet nothings, the author here is saying these are sweet nothings, deceptive quote unquote help that is just geared toward gaining more control over you. So again, they're talking about a narcissist in a personal relationship, but it is a perfect description of how politics operates. So in conclusion, once again, government is narcissists. Like, government is just a group of narcissists. That's all it is. The reason the descriptions fit exactly is because there is no difference. Government is just abusive people that are deceptive and manipulative, and that's, what a narcissist is, right? Fundamentally. So I hope you found some of this insightful. Thanks for listening.